Rob and Katie in the morning. Hey everybody, welcome to our Monday afternoon podcast. Only 2 left. It's been a good time, and hopefully we'll see you back after the summer season. I'm Rob Rodriguez, and this is Katie Stover from our marketing department, and we're going to just go through our series, What Would You Do? And today we're looking at Hannah, the mother of Samuel, and we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel. And so before we get into that, Katie always likes to let us know what's going on at Keswick. So Katie, what's going on?
Yeah, so this coming Thursday, July 1st, we have our last community hymn sing of the season. The theme is your favorites, and if you would like to come, it's $10, and you can call 1-800-453-7942 to purchase your tickets. And also, our summer conference season is coming up really soon, and so if you would like to take part in that and come and join us, you can call 1-800-453-7942.
And the first family week is when?
July 11th through the 16th, and it's with Dr. Frank Cerrone and Dr. Roger Wilmore. I probably butchered that. I'm sorry.
That's awesome. That's great, though.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's summer season's coming up real quick. It's that busy time at Keswick, and we're excited to see people on campus. Some of the restrictions being loosened, and just a great season coming up. So we've already done the Memorial Day weekend. There's been a Young at Hearts conference already, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, there's been a few things going on, and so the family weeks start off the big part of the season. So make sure we're praying for summer staff and for their leaders and all the things going on there. So all right, we're going to get into 1 Samuel, and we're going to talk about the life of Hannah. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we're going to read the 28 verses in the chapter. And we're going to talk today about prayer and the promises of God and trusting God and God's faithfulness and obedience to Him. And so the big idea of today is I want you to see a lady named Hannah and how she had to trust God and His promises and His faithfulness. And her willingness to give up her son Samuel was as much as about obedience as it was in trusting God's wisdom. And so when God calls us to relinquish control over our things and the people in our lives, this is a symbol of what God is trying to do in our life. So whether it's with a kid or a parent or a romantic partner, it may be a job or goal or even a dream. It might be a possession that we hold dear, but whatever it is, when we give it over to God, it's worth it. So let's read the verses 9 to 18 of 1 Samuel chapter. Let's just read the whole chapter. We'll do chapter 1. Now there was a certain man from Ramathim Zophim from the hill of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Toho, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. The 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. It happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, he would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat, and why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat of the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. Now it came about, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Then Eli said to her, How long will you drink or make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah said, No, my lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now of my great concern and provocation. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you've asked of him. She said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord before they returned again to the house in Ramah. And then Elkanah had relations with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. It came about in due time after Hannah had conceived that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, Because I've asked of the Lord. Then the man Elkanah went up to all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best to you. Remain until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, although the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. She said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition which I've asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. So Hannah and Eli interact about 3 different points. Beginning with verse 11, Hannah makes a vow to give the child to God, and God provides her one. And this is followed by her need for vindication after Eli believes for her to be drunk, but she pours out her troubled heart to Eli, and as she's been doing the entire time in prayer. And so finally, with confidence from Eli that if God is willing, that God would provide a child, Hannah is sent forth with hope that God will answer her prayer. You know, as Hannah is bitter in the barrenness that she has, she's also grateful in her anticipated fruitfulness that she may have. And so she vows that the son that she would have in her womb would be preserved for obedience only to Yahweh. And at the beginning, we have a clue about how and why Samuel may become such a sturdy champion of this faith. He's predestined by his mother to be a champion. Okay, so Hannah's heart and her desire are seen in her earnest prayer. Hannah is the one who strove in prayer to overcome her barrenness, and this is a model of diligence and a model of faithfulness even in the middle of suffering or in the middle of loss. You know, and there's something beautiful about the memory of God. In his infinite, all-compassing knowledge, God remembers our sins and holds us accountable for them, but because of redemption, he's more precious. We're more precious to him, and so he never forgets, but he sees Jesus when he sees us. And so it's not that he forgets our sin, but that he doesn't charge us for them because he looks at Jesus. Hannah sought the Lord, and he remembered her when she returned home. You know, God does remember, and this is precisely what Hannah asked for, that God would remember and not forget her. And, you know, God is a powerful rememberer, if you think about that. And when God remembers the partner and he remembers the promise, there is this newness that becomes possible. And so this new son is the one that was asked for, and he's the one that was graciously given. So the hopeless one, Hannah, is now given a future. And this is the characteristic of the way God works in the land of Israel. There's this drama of this hoped-for event that continues to happen. And so there's this gift that only implements what's going to happen, what's anticipated, but then there's an actual gift that will bring forth even more. And so one of the keys to this passage comes when Hannah responds to the birth of Samuel. Her desire is to have a child, but it's not outweighed by her desire to know that God saw her, and so that he did not abandon her in her barrenness. And so Hannah's prayer of dedication is recorded in verse 11, and this could be seen as an attempt to bribe God in exchange for the privilege of motherhood, and that God would get a servant out of her. But when you read the whole thing, there's this element of a self-interest in Hannah's desire for a son, but that's not the whole story. If we really understand the way God's goodness works and we really appreciate the gifts that God gives us, there's this bubbling that comes up inside of us because there's this uncontrollable urge to respond in the fullest way that we can imagine, because God's love inspires us to not only have gratitude but also have consecration. And it's possible that Hannah's deepest desire is not simply to have a son, but for her to have a child that she could dedicate to God's service. Her longing for a son may have been partly why she wanted to do that, but allowing Samuel to be brought up in the temple is not as necessary as a terrible sacrifice, but it's a deep joy that she has. So in spite of this inevitable accompanying pain of losing Samuel, many mothers and fathers have prayed for children to be used in God's service, but there's this paradox of joy and pain when we deliver our children over to God. But what a safe place for our kids to be, in the hands of God. Often when you think about it, our faith is challenged because we've come to a point where it feels like all of our dreams have died, and then we just got to move on from them. But let's never forget that coming to that place can either be a place of extreme bitterness or the rock bottom where we finally get utterly dependent on God for a change. You've heard the song by Elevation Worship, Graves into Gardens, and the idea that God has this power to change things completely. It's a great song. Maybe the greatest contribution that Hannah has is Hannah's offering of Samuel back to the Lord. Hannah speaks to the heart of all of us who listens to what it means to genuinely be a parent. When you think about parents who have children who are called to the mission field, especially to places where Christians aren't welcome, there's this understanding that missionaries have of the Lordship of Christ, and sometimes parents don't understand that, but we have to surrender our kids to the call of God. There's a lot to unpack, especially with Hannah's petition and then her act of faithfulness to bring Samuel all the way back to Eli. But the core of the story is the depth of Hannah's character. Sometimes as we follow Christ, we'll be asked to give up the most significant things that we seek. For pastors, it's the pulpit instead of speaking the truth. And so we have to make the choice. Maybe it's the CEO who's invested a large amounts of sweat equity, and a lot of heart into his company, but he has to see it go in order for it to grow further. Maybe it's a parent relinquishing a child to a spouse and into God's hands. So Hannah's commitment was driven by love, and her love was for God primarily, but the desire and the feeling that she knew that God loved her first. So as a sidebar, remember, Samuel wasn't the only child that Elkanah and Hannah would have together, but he is their only child whose service to the Lord is recorded. Think about that, the only one whose service is recorded. That's pretty powerful. So, looking at 1 Samuel, we saw the life of Hannah and how she had to trust God and His promises and God's faithfulness. And so she had to have this willingness to give up the son that she longed for as an obedience. And this obedience showed that she had faith in God. And so we'd like to have some small group type questions just for us to think about this a little bit further. If you'd like to comment, you can put it in the thread below and we can continue the conversation throughout the week. So, Katie, let's go through some questions.
All right, these are kind of long ones. Get ready.
All right.
So, number one, in what ways is Hannah's story shocking to you? How might you have responded to the answered prayer? Would you have been able to take the son you long for and enlist him in the service of God? And how hard would it have been to deal with your loss?
Yeah, Hannah went through a lot, man. She went from this prayer to getting an answer to prayer, to then being given a command to do something with that answered prayer, and then for her to have to feel the after effects of her following God throughout the entire process. And so it is, reading, having the ability to have the entire 66 books of the Word of God and have that kind of, just that authorial hindsight to see the entire picture in play. It's not that shocking because God did that to Abraham. He did that to all these different people. And so, but it looks like, this is one of the things that it's not that God wants to see how we'll obey. He already knows how we're going to do it. He wants us to see it. He wants us to see whether we're short in our spirituality or whether we're found in abundance. And so, the answered prayer of a son is, something that, I think we forget sometimes to thank God for what He's done. But I think like something as drastic as this, where it's been a long time and then she has a child, it's easier when God strips everything away for us to thank Him for what He's done. And I believe He does that sometimes. He causes us to have some lack in our life in order to make sure that we're relying completely on Him. but I think when you think about her having to give up Samuel to serve Jesus, that's what she said she was going to do. She said that I want to give something back to Jesus, or give something back into the Lord. And so to give back Samuel is exactly what, her spiritual heart's desire, whether it was her fleshly one or not, was to serve God even in her posterity. And so, to put Samuel in the service of the Lord, it actually makes spiritual sense. And even though sometimes spiritual sense doesn't match with our fleshly sense, this is exactly what we do with what God gives us. We give it all to Him. It's not easy, but we do it. And like the last part was how hard would it be to deal with the loss? I think you have to be careful of that word loss. And that's why I think we put it in quotation marks, because it's not loss, it's gain. There's longing, there's missing, your child, but it's not lost, because Samuel's exactly where he's supposed to be.
Yeah. So some have argued that part of Hannah's desire was to have something to give to the Lord. Consider the struggle she faced and ask yourself in what ways you might want to do the same. Is there a heart's desire you have that you would use for God's glory if He granted it to you? In what ways might you do that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think that Hannah's desire was always to give something back to the Lord, and it may have been hard in her carnality, but she had a son to give back to the Lord. And so there is that struggle there. What would you do? Is there a way to compromise? No, Lord, can I tithe instead of giving my son? Can he serve part-time? Can I have him for a little bit and then you can have him? There's one of the desires that I think we have of all of our hearts is to use our talents for the Lord. And I think sometimes, we get caught up in things that we do well and real spiritual talents that God has given us. Like, is it more profitable spiritually to have the gift of hospitality or to be able to shoot baskets? You know what I'm saying? Like there's a difference between the two things. And I believe the real gifts that God gives us, we need to be able to use for His honor and His glory. So it never feels like we're giving something up. It's that we're using it.
Mm-hmm. So read Hannah's prayer in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. How do these verses celebrate God's provision from chapter 1?
So we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 2, right?
Mm-hmm. Verses 1 through 10.
All right. Then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord, my horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is no one beside you, nor there is any rock like our God. Boast no more so very proudly. Do not let arrogance come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and with Him actions are weighted. The bows of the mighty are shadowed, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full hire themselves out of bread, but those who were hungry cease to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to the seven, but she who has many children languishes. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down Sheol and raises it up. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low, He also exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with nobles and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and He set the world on them. He keeps the feet of His godly ones, but the wicked ones are silenced in darkness. For not by might shall men prevail. Those who contend with the Lord shall be shattered. Against them He will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and He will give strength to His king. He will exalt the horn of His anointed. So I think, just this prayer that she has, obviously, one of the first things that people don't pray like that anymore. This lady's prayer was just chock full of doctrine and truth about God. And I love the way that that the Spirit of God leads her to talk about provision, how it's all in the sovereignty of God, and how it's all been a blessing, how God is able to give and God is able to take away. God can make things rise up, God can shut things down. And it's all on His sovereignty. So when you think about provision being under the sovereignty of God, everything that God gives us is not only good, we don't deserve it. And He gives it to us anyway. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of provision, it has graciousness in it, and it has the mercifulness of God in it. And so I think that's what Hannah was beginning to flesh out in that prayer.
So the last one, what are some ways that Hannah describes God in these verses? Perhaps you could write your own prayer to the Lord using similar phrases and thoughts describing your own experience with Him.
That'd be a good example and a good exercise to do. He talks about that that her horn, that the way that her speech is directed by the Lord. She calls him the rock. She calls him the one who feeds. She calls him the one that makes alive and the one that kills. She calls him the pillar of the earth. She basically calls him all stability and all provision. Anything that protects, anything that keeps things in order, and anything that makes things flourish, God's in charge of that. So I'm thinking about the last week that we have, and so like I said, I'm going to try to be on site so we can do this live. But it's been a pretty good season. I mean, we've done a lot of podcasts. I think we've nailed the remote podcast down well, but it'll be good to be in person for one last time.
Yeah.
I'm excited about what's going on at Keswick. I just, it's going to be crazy busy over there. So we're praying for you and we're praying for the staff because there's a lot going on. So, we can't wait for you guys to join us next week. Make sure you're checking out the other podcasts. Have a great afternoon. God bless you.